ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs. I really hate this MC thing because I feel that every time we have great conversations going, I'm the bad cop and I'm the one intervening to transition between great conversations. So thank you very much for your coming to... merci beaucoup. J'ai la tâche encore ingrate de couper court à des conversations animées à vos tables, but we have a great panel for you for lunch, and we'll want to hear from them as they come in. The Victoria Forum, we looked at diversity through 6 different thematics. But there was one thing missing, is where diversity happens, or where diversity doesn't happen, where inclusion happens, or where inclusion fails. And that's the cities. So with a view to making sure that not only were we discussing the theme of diversity, we also wanted to make sure we discuss the locus of diversity and inclusion. So today we have a panel that will examine diversity and inclusion through that lens. And let me welcome our panel and hand it over to Kathy Bahn from TELUS. We're grateful to TELUS for sponsoring this lunch. Thank you very much, and over to you, Kathy.
Thanks, Sebastian. I promise my notes are brief. I've got 3 pages, very big text, well-spaced, won't take long. Good afternoon. I guess we're afternoon now. We're having lunch. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. At TELUS, our purpose is to improve people's lives through the power of technology. By unleashing the power of the internet, we are bridging digital divides, transforming healthcare, sustainably supporting our planet, creating vivid learning environments, and investing in safe, healthy communities. Because more than ever, Canadians are collectively dealing with significant social issues. We are experiencing unprecedented climate change threats, such as this past summer's wildfires, hurricanes and earthquakes, as well as the unassailable scientific evidence that the Earth is getting warmer. We have increasing social and economic inequalities in our city. BC has the highest child poverty rate in Canada. Affordability from food to housing is crippling many families. We have growing digital and socio-economic divides. Many people cannot afford to access the internet. For those using technology addiction is an increasing reality for many youth. Distracted driving kills more people today than impaired driving, and 50% of youth have been victims of cyberbullying. We at TELUS believe that we must take accountability to address these social issues working with partners. The only way we can make the future friendly and sustainable is if we enable collaboration across multiple sectors, including private, public, nonprofit, business, and individuals. We are incredibly grateful at TELUS that we get to stand with you and enable you to do what you do best, building a brighter and better future for Canadians. Thank you for all you do. I have the distinct honor of introducing your moderator for this afternoon session. Dr. Daniel F. Musica is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Conference Board of Canada. He is also Vice President and Chair of the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, also known as NSERC. He was previously the Dean and the RBC Financial Group Professor of Entrepreneurship at the Sauder School of Business at UBC and continues as a Professor of Management at UBC. Please join me in welcoming, as your moderator, Dr. Musica.
Thank you. So I can honestly say, good afternoon, everyone. Wanted to make sure the energy was there. I've been in too many undergraduate classrooms. If I get no response, it's worrying. But anyway, if you are here to talk about and hear about smart cities, you're in the right place. And this panel is going to focus on the evolution of smart cities and really address 4 questions. What do we mean by a smart city? Lots of different definitions out there. What are the opportunities they create? And one thing that I can tell you positively is that we've heard about some of the issues that are in our urban areas, but there are solutions. And having talked with the panel, actually, I'm heartened. What are the challenges in creating smart cities, truly smart cities? And how can smart cities really increase diversity, inclusion, and accessibility? Just to give you a little background, I went into our metropolitan group at the conference board. I have 55 economists and 110 opinions at any one point in time. So it turns out that if you get a sense of Canada as a country, we are increasingly urbanized. More than 80% of Canada's population lives in cities, up from less than 50% 100 years ago. 60% of Canada's population lives in just 15 metropolitan areas. Given our aging population, we are going to rely heavily on immigration to continue the development and growth of our economy and society. We have an average of 271,000 immigrants per year have come into Canada over the past 5 years. 84% of those, 84% have landed in the big 15 areas. I can tell you that 2/3 of Canada's GDP is generated in 15 metropolitan areas. The average worker in the big 15 metropolitan areas is almost 20% more productive than the average worker in the country. What we find is that, of course, these cities are creating opportunities. Agglomeration is creating more opportunities for successive generations. What we worry about a little bit, and are the issues that have been articulated just a moment ago, but in addition, the fact that smart cities could, in fact, impact things like economic disparities, because technology alone could push out unskilled labor. So it's a very interesting time. We have lots of opportunity, and to speak to this, we have a great panel. So I would ask them to come up here, and I'll introduce them. First of all, Mayor Lisa Helps from the City of Victoria. Dan. I'm going to be very brief. You can see their bios online because we have a short time here. Mr. Dan Pontefract, who's the Chief Envisioner at TELUS, and Mr. John Longbottom, who's a Smarter City Strategy Leader for IBM Canada. Mr. Eric Swanson, who's Executive Director of Generation Squeeze. Mr. Dan Mrushinsky, who's Director of ESRI, and Ms. EMILIE de ROSENROLL, who's CEO of South Island Prosperity Project. So welcome them all again. And I'm very quickly going to turn over the conversation to the mayor. Lisa.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Is this on? Now is it good?
Hello?
Oh, there we go. Is this on?
It's on.
Excellent. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. As always, I want to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered on the traditional territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, specifically Lekwungen-speaking peoples, and to thank them for the opportunity to live and work and play and learn on their territories. I'm going to speak very briefly about what a smart city is and what it's not, tell you a little bit about the Smart South Island project that we're working on here, but not too much about it because the final speaker is going to fill you in more. So first of all, how many people, when you think about smart cities, and you're going to have to yell out because not everyone has a microphone, when you think about smart cities, what do you think about? What do you think about when you think about smart cities? I know, over to you, just yell it out. What comes to mind? Cycling to work, okay, what else? Technology, what else? Wireless internet, no emissions, great parks, options to work at home, sanctuary cities, transportation, something grid, smart grid probably. Okay, so excellent. We've got a very wide understanding of what smart cities are. And the answer is everything that everyone said is actually correct. And smart cities start with people. Smart cities start with quality of life. Smart cities start with how do we create well-being. So when I think about smart cities, when I thought about smart cities before I got involved in the Smart South Island project, I thought smart cities were about big data and technology. It was something out there somewhere else, something that only IBM could do, and it didn't really have much to do with people. We're going to hear from IBM in a moment. But what I've come to realize in the way that we've been building our Smart South Island plan is if we don't start with people, we're not going to have a smart city. So the Smart South Island plan is a response to the federal government's Smart Cities Challenge, and the federal government has wisely asked cities across the country to think about how can you use big data and technology to improve the quality of life for residents. And they're awarding big bucks for coming up with solutions, and the City of Victoria and the region is in competition for the $10 million prize. And the federal government has wisely said, start with people, start with the problems that you're trying to solve, don't start with technology. And so the Prosperity Project, which you'll hear about in a moment, its 10 municipal members came together with partners from the Victoria Foundation and the library and said, what are the challenges that we're trying to solve in the region? And they're not going to surprise anybody who's from this region, because they're the challenges that we've been circling around for a long time. Transportation and mobility, housing, economic resilience and inclusion, human health, and environmental sustainability. So while those aren't new problems, the hope with smart cities is that we can bring new approaches and new solutions to bear on them. But how do we know we're successful? We don't know we're successful, and this is really important. We don't know we're successful if we've created X number of new apps. We don't know we're successful if we've created X number of new jobs, although of course that's important. This is what we've identified as criteria for success for building a smart region. One criteria, we must include First Nations. Second, well, we're being a bit strategic, we must align with the federal funding guidelines. Number 3, we must align with municipal and First Nations strategic plans, official community plans, and existing resources. Number 4, we're going to be successful if we involve, engage, and seek input from our residents, communities, councils, and advisory councils. We're going to be successful if we're ambitious, bold, and distinctive in both content and process. And final criteria for success, if we add value to our communities and have tangible positive impacts on the health and quality of life of individuals and the well-being of our communities. So it's not about building new apps, although we know we will. It's about how do we use technology and big data to make life better, and how do we do it by sourcing both the problems and the solutions from people. So I'll leave it at that. I've got a couple concrete examples, but I'm going to pass it along right now, and we'll come back to those in the question period, if I still have a voice. Thanks.
Yes. And now, thank you very much, Lisa. We'll go to Dan, who's going to talk to us about his vision for a smart city.
Thank you, Dan.
We have three Dans.
Yeah, it's not a panel of Dans. It just happens to be a few Dans. So, smart cities. Well, obviously, we know that there's got to be some technology in there, right? So whether that's sensors or IoT or big data or analytics or 5G, this is all going to help make up this so-called smart city. As an executive at TELUS, I must assure you that it was my responsibility to say that, because otherwise I may have a pink slip on Monday. But my hope actually is antithetical to the term smart city. In fact, I'd like us to think more of what I refer to as the digital agora. What's an agora? Well, an agora was a word from the Greeks back in the day, whereby the human gathering occurred, a community. And in the agora, the Greek agora, people gathered to flourish. They used to share ideas. They used to pontificate. They'd have dialectical conversations. It was Socratic, if you will. All these fancy words to basically mean it was the Greek word for eudaimonia. Eudaimonia means a state of human flourishing. That, to me, is what we're after in the so-called smart city. A state of human flourishing, to play off of Mayor Help's point that it starts with humans. So how can we possibly get to the digital community, the digital agora? Well, I'd like us to think about a gentleman called Rick. And Rick is an acronym, RIC. So the digital agora for me is responsive, inclusive, and collaborative. It's not technology first. Technology aids and abets Rick. So what does responsive and inclusive and collaborative mean? So let's think about this for a second. So responsive, well, sure, we mentioned technology. We're going to have eventually these little sensors on everything. Buses to figure out perhaps congestion in our roads. Sensors on our traffic signals, again. But we can also have sensors on things like our water meters. Sensors on whether or not we're able to see where there are droughts. Sensors on everything is going to be a critical piece to being responsive. So let's just leave that for a second, right? That's the technology side. But what about inclusive and collaborative? What does inclusive mean in our so-called digital agora? If we're inclusive, we are thinking about all. We're making sure that there isn't a digital divide. We're making sure that the technology of a so-called smart city is available to all. That's inclusivity. We can't put the word smart city without thinking about being inclusive to all, whatever your socioeconomic background is. And then lastly, on the collaborative side, it's not just a Victoria or a Vancouver or an Ottawa or a Boston or a Singapore or a Seoul that is a so-called smart city. It's the smart agora, the digital agoras. We are a planet. Let's be collaborative and share in those ideas so that we're not all inventing the same wheel once again. Here's an example from a housing perspective of how we might be a little more collaborative. Let's say, for example, here in Victoria, that we have an elderly couple who is now an empty nester. They live in a relatively modest home of about 3,000 square feet. They have 4 bedrooms. 4 bedrooms of which they're only occupying 1. What goes with the other 3? They're empty. If we're collaborative and are thinking about the digital agora, we will find a way in which to share the knowledge that those bedrooms are unoccupied, that perhaps the elderly couple are lonely, and maybe they could help out students from UVic. Maybe they could help out other people within our communities who need housing and or shelter. That's the collaborative side. That's the humanity. That's the eudaimonia of human flourishing. And so in summary, a smart city is important, but if we can, I urge us to be thinking about the digital agora and to be looking for Rick inside of that agora.
We'll enjoy the search for Rick, but we've heard a great deal about the fact that it's not about technology, but it's enabled by technology. So we turn to you, John, and IBM.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. It's wonderful to be here, by the way. I'm very excited about this panel and hopefully driving to some outcome that we can rally around. As I looked around the panel members, I noticed that they're all using this fancy technology. And I happen to be here with what is a punch card. By the way, this punch card is 50 years old. Wow. 50 years old. Still functional, by the way. Talk about technology. So when we actually created this notion called smart cities. Our research organization did some study of ourselves and found that by taking data and using it more effectively, we're able to create better decisions. So we looked at, outside of ourselves in the marketplace, what kinds of entities kind of represented that potential. And we found this notion that cities were complex systems of systems, that in their own right were creating massive, massive amounts of data were flowing through. And by taking that data and turning it into insight, we're able to make great decisions right across the board, everything from improving transportation, improving the use of water, leveraging the resources in much more effective ways, and that was really important. But this notion has evolved over time. Connectivity came into it. So the broadband movement suggested that it was really about intelligent cities and how we connect people together. And then lately, it's been, because of what's been happening in the world, it's become very much about sustainable and resilient cities. So how do we put a more important theme on top of this opportunity that technology presents? But there are many challenges. We'll hear a lot of good stories about smart cities around the world. Frankly, my opinion, we're not going fast enough. We're not making the kind of impact that we could if we really doubled down and rallied around the thought. So just a couple of points on the challenges. Smart cities technologies and the uses of them is really about innovation. And I find that, the structures that represent cities aren't necessarily in their own right, they're the bureaucracies, innovative. Try to be, but aren't really. And I take a perfect example of the procurement policies that cities have to abide by and are instructed by. And there really is a chasm there between what's possible and what we're actually accomplishing. So my theory is a bit of, I'm not sure you create smart cities from the inside out more than you create smart cities from the outside in. And we look around at this technology, we look at social networking, we look at the kinds of things that are going on with data sharing, creating insight, some of it good, some of it bad, that there really is a very instructful opportunity for us to build these smart cities from the outside in. I used to run IBM's National Aboriginal Strategy, and we ran a program in Winnipeg once, and we bussed kids in from reserves from around Winnipeg, and to give them appreciation for the kinds of skills that they could acquire and the kind of jobs they could get and the kind of economy. And I was absolutely taken when, and this is about 5 years ago, I was absolutely taken when almost every one of those kids that came off the bus had a cell phone or a smartphone. So I put forward this notion, maybe we need to be creating these smart cities from the outside in. I was just in a session yesterday with some folks from University of Victoria, and it was very, very exciting. There was a user that would represent a city, and in reference to smart cities, the technology was very much a toy. So it was really something that was out there. So we do have some gaps and challenges in being able to really exploit this. The opportunities, of course, of smart cities is that you can use this data to make wonderful decisions across the whole spectrum of what our cities represent, whether that be from a physical infrastructure standpoint or social infrastructure standpoint. And there's long, long lists of benefits that we could achieve. In terms of inclusiveness and accessible by all, smart cities, if they're not done right, can be wasteful and not make the kind of impact. And the real key theme there, that has to be the user or the citizen or the entity at the center. And if we don't have that as our fundamental driver, then I'm not sure what it is that we're really going to accomplish in a positive way for smart cities. I also see that this is a tremendous opportunity to start leveraging technology in new and innovative ways, which means we have an opportunity to bring people into a new set of jobs, into a new set of learning, into a new set of collaborations. And oh, by the way, at the end of the day, it might not just be about the cities. I'm very much about an advocate. If we can do the smart city things in cities, why can't we do it in the regions that represent the rest of the world, whether that's the over 600 First Nations communities, and many more when we look at the Indigenous population as a whole. And of course, what's been coming up very, very strongly lately is many of the social themes. And frankly, I think we have a great opportunity to take this to the next level. So I appreciate the conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I too have some old punch cards at home. I keep protecting them. But I'd like to go to Eric. And Eric, I think you can give us some perspective on what role the next generation is going to play in helping to move those smart cities to reality.
And I very much appreciate the invitation. Thanks to the sponsor and the organizers. This is a great conversation and discussion. Patricia, we got the slide deck coming up?
We do.
So my name is Eric Swanson. I'm the Executive Director of Generation Squeeze. We're a research and advocacy organization for younger Canadians. So you can go on to the next one there. What are smart cities? For one, I think smart cities are those that have clear eyes and are capable of seeing the big picture, macro trends from far off and tackling them head on. And I'm sure we'll have a chance to discuss many of those trends during this discussion, but I'd like to focus on one of them. So here's the reality. Younger Canadians are facing a 360-degree squeeze. Millions of younger Canadians across the country, many of whom are in love with their cities but are in a desperate struggle to afford to stay. As you can see from the slide, Canada's economy is producing more wealth than ever before. But for many younger Canadians, life just keeps getting harder. Compared to, next slide please. Compared to a generation ago, our earnings after adjusting for inflation are down, even though we're more than twice as likely to attend post-secondary, taking out more student debt for the privilege, and facing housing markets that are up hundreds of thousands of dollars. And this is a trend that is playing out in cities all across Canada. Next slide, please. Including here in Victoria. You can see that the trend is very consistent. The bottom line is that younger Canadians are working and studying more to have less. Take housing, for instance. In 1976, it took the average young Canadian just 5 years of full-time work to save a 20% down payment on an average home. Today, across the country, it takes 15 years. In Ontario, across the country, it's 13, Ontario 15. Here in Victoria, it takes 16 years. Looking across to Metro Vancouver, things have become absolutely desperate, with young Canadians needing to save close to 30 years of full-time work just to save 20% on an average home. And keep in mind, that's not your single detached white picket home, that's homes of all types in there, nearly 30 years. What that means is that young Canadians would essentially have to start saving in the womb, which is ironic because childcare costs in this province and across the country continue to be the equivalent of a second rent or mortgage payment. Next slide, please. The result is that home ownership for many young Canadians is becoming increasingly out of reach. And that's putting even more strain on an already strained rental market. So a big challenge for Canadian cities today, as they seek to become smarter, is to recognize that young people are being squeezed for time and money, working and studying more to have less. And as individuals and families, even discussing with the panel earlier, I know we're doing all we can to adapt. And the smartest cities will be those that find a way to meet us halfway. One of the interesting consequences of this 360-degree squeeze, this definitely shows up in my life, but also in my peer network, is that this day-to-day struggle makes it very difficult to feel empowered and engaged on the biggest trends and challenges of our time, the intergenerational ones of climate change and biodiversity collapse, deterioration of resources. When you're just struggling, running as fast as you can to stay in place, you may care a great deal about those things, but you may not have time to attend the hearing, at City Hall, or you may not have time to participate in that online form with the federal government. And so tackling these day-to-day pressures, for example, housing, I think is a prerequisite to the kind of engagement we need on these more intergenerational trends. One more thing I'll say about smart cities is that I think they are those that can get the first principles right. And so, for example, on housing, we're advocating that we should be treating our real estate market first and foremost as a place to provide homes for people to live in, and only secondarily as a means to an investment return. We are firm advocates for densification and more supply, but it is very, very difficult to build fast enough to keep up with speculative and commodified demand. And so we need to treat both the supply and the demand side. So the first principle for a housing market, we believe, should be homes first. And when it comes to the economy, we believe that a first principle should be that the economy is redesigned to use no more resources than Earth systems have the capacity to renew, and we produce no more waste than Earth systems have the capacity to absorb, leaving room for all life on the planet, just to go big here. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to my fellow panelists.
Thank you very much. And I will say that on behalf of many of you in here, there is another potential financing group for this generation, the Bank of Mom and Dad. How many of you are involved? But it is a challenge, and engaging all generations is going to be an important part of delivering what Lisa has spoken about. So over to you, Dan. And Dan, you've been involved in sustainable development for quite a while, so I'm kind of curious about your views on this smart city.
Thanks, Dan. So I'm the third Dan on the panel, and one of these Dans is not like the others, right? So
this Dan is getting there.
There you go. So I work for a company called Esri Canada, and we make mapping software. So we are definitely a technology company, and I see the world through the filter of everything being somewhere. So it's everything can fit on a map, everything is somewhere. But I'm the first to say that smart cities are not about technology, okay? Just like the others, have said, sorry about that. Just like the others have said, smart cities are not about technology. Technology supports smart cities. So the thing about a smart city is smart cities put their residents first, both their human residents and from the wild kingdom, right? The animals and the plants that are part of the city. It's the entire environment that we live in that a smart city is to support. So the technology in that regard is there to share data that we collect on these things in an open manner so that we can learn about these things and make smarter, better decisions to live better. And we make data-driven decisions from this data sharing. So some of the challenges, though, that we're facing when we're looking at creating smart cities is a lot of cities don't have a clear vision. They don't know what they want to be or where they want to go. So it's really hard to get there if you don't know where you're trying to get to. Without that clear vision and having an understanding of how we want to include the younger generations and support them and those sorts of things, we're just wandering. We're wandering in the forest, we're not really getting anywhere. So once we do have a vision, though, we still have challenges that get in the way of achieving these smart cities, and that is NIMBYism and fear of change, right? So people are wanting the vision, but they don't want it to happen in their backyard. And I think some of that comes down to having the courage to make the decisions, whether they're regulations or legislation, to enable some of these changes to happen. And those things have to be made. So once you have that vision, you have to take the courage and you have to go forward. And that's on all fronts, both from the government but also on business side as well. Once you make that decision, the next thing is, as John was saying, is getting innovative, getting people engaged in the conversation. And this is an area where technology certainly can help. I would hazard that everybody in this room is carrying a device in their pocket, some sort of a phone. And if you look across the population, almost everybody is carrying some sort of device. There are some folks that don't have them, but almost everybody has some sort of a device. That device, enabled with simple collaboration tools, enables a conversation to happen amongst the population. Once that population starts talking and communicating back and forth, we can start to make decisions, we can start to take issues to the next level of solutions and finding out what we can do with them. But again, we can't look at technology as a silver bullet. It's people. People are the ones that are driving this. So the opportunities for smart cities, though, are really to create environments where citizens are able to meet their everyday needs easier. So whether that's getting to work faster in the morning, whether that's finding a place to live, or whatever that is, it's sharing data and understanding that we can live our lives better and make those everyday needs easier to attain. That also includes the wild kingdom, right? So not doing things that end up putting pollutants into the ocean and all those sorts of things that damage those around us that aren't, human beings. So data sharing certainly can help that. And then I think the last item that I want to talk about is we talk about the potential for it to be divisive and create more separation between the haves and the have-nots. And while I said before that not everybody might have a digital device in their pocket, if we are actually sharing information and learning from the greater group, sort of that crowdsourcing information and learning from that, we can make better decisions that will help those that don't have rise with the rising tides. So whether it's, where do we put health centers, where do we put daycare centers, where do we put all those different services and things that help us achieve our everyday needs, those that don't have the digital capability to be engaged in that communication will be able to get those services better if the rest of us are engaged in the communication. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to Emily.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we've heard a great deal about the South Island Prosperity Project, so we look forward to hearing.
Excellent, thank you. Hello, everybody. Pleasure to be here. My name's EMILIE ROSENROLL, and I'm the CEO of the South Island Prosperity Project. We were put together about a year and a half ago by 10 of our regional municipalities here, 5 business and industry associations, 3 of the post-secondary institutions, as well as about a dozen private sector members, 2 First Nation communities, and 2 nonprofits. So a really broad intersection of stakeholders and partners in this initiative. So our mandate is actually to try to catalyze more household-sustaining jobs, and we do that in a variety of ways. We do that through projects such as Smart Cities Planning. So what gets me most excited about smart cities is actually the capacity for us to adapt these tools to local conditions, and to understand how we can use that to solve local problems. So the smart cities have actually been around for at least a decade. I mean, people were calling them digital cities in the 90s. You could even go back to the Romans and say that they were actually trying to use technologies to improve our living, our quality of life by using things like aqueducts and roads, and they were very conscious of that as well. So the Agora is not, obviously the Agora is very old, and this is a sort of revival concept, maybe even a utopian concept. So having said all that, I think that we can look at the last decade or so and say, well, how do we now use what the world has been doing and actually make smart cities smarter? And I say that because I think there's actually loads of examples of smart cities that aren't very smart at all. I think it's a very dumb city to create a greenfield, brand new city from scratch right outside of an unsustainable city that's growing bananas and they can't fix it. So let's start another one that's full of utopic technology. No, I don't think that's very smart. So there's lots of ways that we can actually take some examples of what's not worked particularly well across the world, what might have actually led to more divisiveness or a less inclusive place, and actually try to make improvements from the bottom up. So I agree with John, it has to come from outside in, but I think it also has to come from inside out. So I would say that there's two major takeaways for me of how we can do this to improve upon what we've seen. And one is to start off with a vision. And so I think that if we don't have a strategy in place, it's very difficult to ask the technologists of the world to come in and solve our problems. So I think that's challenging. That's actually traditionally often what's happened are local governments looking to big business and saying, how do we make our systems work better? So I don't think that works. I think that we need to start off with a vision of where we want to be and what are the major pressing issues, perhaps our most long-standing development issues, and how do then we leverage technology for the better. So the ones that we've come up with so far are things like, are not going to be a surprise to anybody, economic resilience and inclusion, environmental health, human health, as well as others such as transportation, mobility, and housing and affordability. So those are the issues that we think are going to be continuing to define us. We're surrounded by water in the South Island. We're out of resources. We're out of roadway. We can't make the sprawl happen into the ocean. So we have to be smarter with how we do things. So I think there's that opportunity. We're doing this by hosting a series of public symposiums in the South Island. First of all, to get the public engaged in what exactly can being smart solve for us. So where do we want to be over the next 10, 20 years? And then how can we use these global examples to improve our state of affairs here? And then the second one will be a second symposium where we actually ask the community, now what are your best ideas? And this is called an open innovation challenge, where we say, you know, what are your best ideas? You know, there's an old saying, locals know where all the watering holes are, and I'm notoriously terrible for repeating these kinds of sayings, but I think I got it right. So that's our concept, is that people actually know what they need and how to improve. So leveraging that wisdom. The second part is inclusive, and that's a theme of the conference, so it's fitting. We do think that it's important for governments, residents, as well as investors to be part of both the implementation and the progress of smart cities. And that's something that isn't always there, or might be there at the beginning and it's not there through the end. So those are a couple things. The other thing I'd just like to bring up is that smart cities are really a response to two major megatrends. So one, urbanization. And about 2 centuries ago, we only had 3% of the population living in cities. Today, it's half, and by 2050, it's going to be 60%. By 2050, 70%. So the numbers are just increasing at an astronomical rate. And yet people in certain progressive, let's say, wealthy regions often don't think that we're subject or we're being impacted by these global megatrends. So that's my last message, is that we are very much impacted. And I think the fellow panelists here have made a good case for that, particularly in terms of youth and affordability. So right now, Greater Victoria's unemployment rate is actually 3.8%. That's the lowest in Canada. And that sounds, some are touting that as a good thing. There's a flip side to that. We're pushing people out. We have nowhere to house them, and people like to be here. So retention is a major issue. Some of our biggest employers are saying they can't keep young people and young families here because they can't afford to live here and buy a house. They should have started saving in the womb, I guess. So that's a major issue, and we have to look at certain sectors such as construction and retail and say that that's probably a canary in the coal mine. They're not able to meet their labor needs anymore. And when that starts to happen, you can actually face constrictions, and that means a contraction of your economy. So if we don't think it matters, we got to think again.
Thank you very much. So we've got about 20 minutes for some conversation. You've all eaten, so there's no excuse. I'm looking forward to volunteers at either of the two microphones. Do we have our first? Yeah. Please, identify yourself if you would.
My name is Hugh Stevens. I'm a resident of Victoria. I'd like to ask the panel what the correlation is between smart cities and scale. Or to put it another way, could Victoria become a smart city if it continues to have 13 separate jurisdictions as part of administration in this area? Thank you.
It's so interesting because on Wednesday, the South Island Prosperity Project released the Prosperity Index, and someone stood up and said, how are you going to fix amalgamation? So every place we go to, this is the question. But in all seriousness, I think there's something really important that's missing here. The Prosperity Project is amalgamation. It's 10 out of 13 local governments working together to become smarter so that our residents can have better lives. So while everyone wants political amalgamation to happen, that's fine. Maybe I do too, maybe I don't, maybe it's more complicated than that, but we have to start recognizing the efforts that are happening. The Prosperity Project is the economic amalgamation of 10 local governments in this region with 12 private sector companies and 3 post-secondaries and industry associations and nonprofits. So yes, amalgamation, but let's look at what's actually happening.
If I'd like to, sorry.
Please.
I would just like to add that, one of the major outcomes and benefits of this smarter approach is that you're taking silos of activity. We've got many, many, many of them. This is just another example of it. I think as opposed to waiting for the structural things to happen, we can actually create a whole layer of value on top of these entities, make them more productive, make them more collaborative. So I think there's a shorter route to success by the smart city strategy than there might be in getting the vote to happen.
And I would just add that the CRD with the SIP project itself is ahead of its time, incidentally. You recall my point about RIC, the last one being collaborative. Imagine 10 communities coming together. Imagine 3 higher education institutions coming together. Imagine 10 plus private sector organizations coming together for something like this. That's collaborative, and that's a collaborative piece of heterarchy, the opposite of hierarchy. If you will, the Agora coming together.
Well, thank you. Another question? That can't be the only question.
Hi, my name is Deirdre Campbell, and in full transparency, I'm on the board of ZIP. But you talk about inclusiveness, and you talk about needing our voices and our ideas at the table. Could you just give us some ideas of how that will happen, particularly in Victoria, over the next coming months? What are the ways that we can get involved in this? Are there events that you're hosting that we can continue this conversation?
Well, thank you for the question. Yeah, there are. So the first event actually is next Saturday. It's a public symposium called the Smart South Island Symposium. So we invite you all to be part of that and to tell us, to really actually engage. It's going to be, we've come in with about 5 different ideas of what are the major priorities for the region, and we could have gotten it wrong. So we might walk out of there with 1 or 10 or 100. It's up to you. So that's the first one. And then the second one will be in February, and that will be a Dragon's Den type event where we actually get to go in there and vote on our favorite smart solution.
Can I answer the question with a bit more of a specific example? And this is really important because as we were all talking, I realized we didn't actually, in many ways, land this for you. So here's one example, and Dan mentioned this, the idea of seniors with extra bedrooms taking people into their homes. Well, I suggested something like that a couple months back. Some of you who, yeah, I know it's funny, right? Because it turned into mayor wants seniors to take homeless, mentally ill, drug-addicted people into their homes. That's what the newspaper said. But this is what I wanted to do, and this is actually what we're doing very quietly behind the scenes, not with any city resources, just with my time and the time of volunteers. We're actually working to create an app that does just that. And how did we do that? We didn't just sit around in a room at City Hall. I invited people who are unhoused but working, living in their cars or living somewhere that's not safe, and people who are housed and have extra bedrooms. We invited them all into a room. We brought Freshworks, which is a local app company, local software company. We all sat together and we looked at different user stories. What are the user stories for the housed people? What would they need in order for this to work? What were the user stories for the unhoused people? What would they need for this to work? And together with a couple cups of coffee in a couple of hours, it was in a room at City Hall, but that's where true inclusivity happens, because what was miraculous about that moment is the people who were unhoused and the people who were housed, they actually needed the same thing. They needed to know, who is this person I'm going to be moving in with, or who's going to move in with me? Who is this person? Do they come late? Do they stay up late? Do they work late? Are they noisy? Do they like classical music or do they like jazz? Like, we really got into that level of detail. But that's how you have an inclusive smart city, where you invite the people who are often marginalized, not in a separate focus group, but together with the other people, all together, and together develop the solution. So that's a specific answer.
It's an interesting one that gives another illustration of outside in, I mean, but you're inside projecting out, so it's a little bit of both there. No?
Adel Gitouni, I am with the University of Victoria. So in my previous life, in the beginning of 2000, there was one country that had the equivalent of the Canadian forces in cyberspace kind of operations. So my question is, when we start talking about big data and the concentration of this data in the hands of the few, what is going to prevent those few of controlling the many? And how it's not only about the protection of identity, it's the manipulation of the minds that we are able to do today.
I don't mind just... Is this on? Okay. You might be better positioned to answer that. But I would like to observe a distinction between the amalgamation and the centralization of data and the sharing of data across different levels. And so just picking up again on the housing example, there are a ton of opportunities to use existing data currently being housed at the municipal level, some at the provincial level, some at the federal level, to better understand what's happening in the housing market, to ensure that we design a market that's for homes first. Provincial government has property transfer tax data, the federal government has income tax data, the municipal government has its own data. So, I think part of being a smart city is opening up the walls between databases and sharing this more freely.
And if I just add, and by the way, the comment is a very, very valid comment. We do need to keep our eyes on that. We do need to be very mindful of the rigidity that we need to have in privacy and protecting that at all times, et cetera. But you raise a very good point. I would almost hope that we are getting closer to that problem, because that would say then we're actually opening up data, opening up information, and sharing it. So that's a problem I'd actually like to have. The problem I've got today, or at least I would say, is that we're not sharing enough. We're not making enough data available. So really, the data is actually concentrated in the hands of a few today. And in many cases, it's not really being exploited to the degree that it could be. But your point is absolutely valid. That needs to be a North Star in all of our thinking, because like anything else, we've got lots of good people and a few bad people. We need to put the right structure in place to make sure that they don't get to advantage of it. But it's a problem I'd actually like to have us, on the table. That would say that we're sharing data, we're doing things, we're making the world a better place. And oh, by the way, now we got to attack that problem. And we've got the ability and the tools, I think, to do it today, and certainly in the next 5 to 10 years when I think this will start to play out. even to a fair larger degree. I hope that just gives a point of view to the question. Not an answer to the question, just a point of view.
So democratizing access really does help in preventing some of the things that you're worried about.
Yes, I'm Christopher Brown from the Canadian International Council, and I want to thank the panel for their interesting and expert views, but I have a general question for the panel. Are there examples out there of really effective smart cities now, which in your individual or collective experience you have some familiarity with? I mean, we don't need to invent the wheel, as somebody pointed out, but are there some good examples which we can draw from? Thank you.
I can take that. So I read an article recently where 66% of American cities are calling themselves smart cities, right? And the fact is, there's not really any city out there that's doing it perfectly. When they get a balance between planet, people, and profit, so the three pillars of sustainability, that's the closest cities are getting to achieving some sense of being smart, right? Zurich is a city that's closest right now in terms of having a balance between those three factors. But they have other big city issues, right? Some cities are really strong on the profit side, but they're not so good then on the people side and back and forth. So really, I wouldn't say there's really any single city that's knocking it out of the park. We have some cities like Dubai that are brand new, relatively brand new to Emily's point. They have good infrastructure, they low carbon footprint in some cases, not Dubai %, but they don't score equally on all those balancing factors. So I would say the answer to your question is no, nobody yet is really getting it right. But it's part of understanding this holistic vision and balancing those three pillars of sustainability if we're going to achieve that in the future.
John?
And I would just add that smart cities is not, the term smart cities, that's not a destination. Smart cities is really about a journey. It's about a behavior. It's a philosophy. You'll never get perfect. You'll never get perfect, just the way the world is and the way things are going. But as new technology becomes available, as people engage more effectively to use that technology in good purposed ways, that's what really I would say is a smart city. It's somebody who has the behavior. They might not be, all the way down the swim lane here. But they are at least in the swim lane, and they're heading towards something they're never going to attain, but along the way they're going to get huge benefits. But just to answer the question, there are probably hundreds of examples of application within this notion of smart cities where cities are creating value, but it's compartmentalized in many cases. But there's this overarching, here's where we'd like to go. I've seen some assessment programs out there that says, you join our program, we'll work with you a little bit, and then we'll put a rubber stamp on you and say, good housekeeping seal of approval, you're a smart city, or you're an intelligent community. Well, it's not a destination, it's a behavior and a journey. But we can give you hundreds of examples of those beginnings.
So this Dan, then the other Dan.
So my favorite example of a specific example is Boston. Boston took a look at their city and they said, how do we help people not get sick? How do we prevent the illness outbreaks? And so they've got this wonderful large pilot happening right now with MIT and the city. And they're using essentially the RIC model, the responsive, inclusive, and collaborative. How? They're putting sensors in sewers, fecal matter sensors, to ascertain whether or not inside of the fecal matter and the urine and so forth, there are strands of certain illnesses. And so in so much that when they receive the data of what's going on, they then are about to send out updates to citizens in this area. Heads up, there's this happening or this happening. That's where we can get to at some point in this city and others if we share our efforts.
Dan?
The one other point that I was going to make is that in thinking about smart cities, we have to think about different metrics. So people have typically thought of, GDP and economic factors as success metrics for cities and economies and so on and so forth. People are starting to think more and more now about happiness indexes, right? So how happy are the people who are living in the communities where they reside? And those are things that are, how many of your neighbors can you name by first name? Those sorts of things. How many vegetables and fruits and vegetables do you eat in a day? Those are for happiness index. And when cities score higher on those factors, everything seems to operate a little bit better because people are acting more like human beings. On our November 25th symposium, we have a moderator there, Charles Montgomery, and he's talking about happy cities. And he gets to the point where he talks about cities being a little bit messy, right? Humans don't live sterile, antiseptic, clean, designed lives. We're a little bit messy, and we kind of, like the market type thing where we interact with each other and work together. That's the sharing idea of a city, getting the data sharing and the information sharing together. It's kind of messy, but that's how it works, and that's what makes them natural. That's what makes them real for people. They're more organic.
We've got a couple here that, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much to the panel for your comments. My name's Brian Ross, and I'm with Asylum Access. We work to make human rights a reality for refugees. And my question is whether you have seen examples of smart cities or technology that helps connect locals and whatever resources they may have at their fingertips with newcomers, be they migrants or refugees. We've seen, for example, in Mexico, something called Ruta de Hospitalidad, the hospitality route, in which employers, educational institutes, citizens can make services available to migrants who are passing through.
Sure. I'll take this one. I'll start. Is Kate Longpray from the Intercultural Association here? No, she's not. I'd give her a shout out if she was. So here's an example of something we're doing in Victoria that was started by the ICA, which is the the Intercultural Association. Thank you. I'm conflating VERX and ICA together. Kate Longpray, who works there, approached Google Translate and said, hey, we've got lots of non-English speakers coming into Victoria, particularly with Syrian refugees and so on. Can we work with you, Google Translate, to create some kind of program so that we can make it easier for people who don't speak English to be integrated in our community? So between the ICA and Google Translate, they've created a program called We Speak Translate. And Kate is going around and training different civil society organizations. All of our frontline staff at City Hall, our fire department are all getting trained in We Speak Translate. So no matter what language you speak, you have able to interface with the city and with other civil society organizations. It's just one example. But
Thank you. That's perfect. I'm going to try to get through a couple of quick questions, so I'm going to ask the panel for some quick answers to these. And let me go over here. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Mersrow. I live here locally in Saanich. My question is primarily directed at Eric, but I welcome other insights as well. Your point about younger Canadians, those really being missing voices in many respects, and not for a lack of interest, that really landed with me. And I see that as a huge problem, particularly on the local government scale and with low voter turnouts. We're really seeing those perspectives missing from our planning, and I would argue that those younger Canadians obviously have the most at stake. So I'm wondering if you have any suggestions, short of rectifying those intergenerational equity issues, for how to get more engagement from younger individuals, including young families, and to bring them more to the table and get their input on this dialogue.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Rebecca. And I'm sure Mayor Helps might have something to say about this as well. But as you say, short of addressing that 360-degree squeeze and things like housing, I think there are many small things that we can do to make the process easier. Victoria is good in that city council hearings are in the evening. That's not always the case in Vancouver and other places. Most young Canadians are not going to be able to show up during the day, for a hearing where there's no determined time for them to speak. They're just kind of waiting around. And so there are many procedural opportunities to improve engagement at the local government level, and there are technological opportunities. Physically showing up is often a barrier for young families. Trying to put food on the table and get kids to bed, it's difficult to show up during the evening. And so I'm hoping that in cities like Victoria and in cities across BC, we can start to introduce more digital live engagement opportunities in decision making. And of course, there is an opportunity for engagement departments within cities to reach out to younger folks in particular, perhaps even with dedicated staff people where that's the mission. And certainly Generation Squeeze, our mission is to engage that demographic and depending on, with the resources that we have, help plug people into those opportunities where they exist. But yeah, there's so much opportunity there.
I've been trying not to say anything.
Thank you.
I congratulate, I think, smart cities is a great concept, but I think our cities are getting dumber. And one of the problems is that the cities now have become the dominant habitat for humanity. This is a very sudden phenomenon. For 99.9% of human existence, we knew we were a part of nature and utterly dependent on it. If we're talking about designing a smart city, it seems to me you have to say what is the fundamental basis on which our habitat is going to be developed. And the first thing you say is, if you don't have air for 3 minutes, you're dead. If you have to breathe polluted air, you're sick. So surely, clean air should be the foundation of however you're going to design your cities. And then, it's the same with water. It's humiliating to me to belong to a province where the capital of this province dumps raw sewage into the oceans. And it's on the East Coast in Halifax as well. This is not the way we're going to be smart, it seems to me, if we understood we were part of nature. So I think, sorry.
That's right. I need to give them a chance to.
David, you'll be happy to know that our sewage treatment system is under construction and that we're treating it to a tertiary level so the water will be able to be reused. And certainly, in our Smart South Island plan, environmental sustainability is the basis from which everything else grows. So there's no mistaking that. You're absolutely right. And something that cities are starting to turn their minds to, and I think this might be something we want to look at in the Smart South Island plan, is how do we quantify natural assets and the value they provide to cities. So the point is well taken.
Hello, panel. My name is Julian Braun, and I'm actually a steering committee member in the City of Victoria's new participatory budgeting pilot. So we're working to try to increase inclusiveness within the municipal process and working with the engagement team. I want to say thank you, Mayor Helps, for bringing up that story of engaging with marginalized voices, because I think that's extremely important in these discussions of pushing cities forward, and it's a challenge that I know that we're feeling in participatory budgeting, which has been our main priority, is trying to be as inclusive as possible to marginalized voices. But when it comes down to it, I find it's very difficult to do. So Emilie, I was actually wondering what the Prosperity Project is doing to make sure that these voices are engaged in the symposium and consultation process.
Great question. Yeah, well, that's one. So it's free. We're doing everything we can to get the information out to as many people and in the unusual places and the usual places. So we're doing quite a lot of effort in terms of just the communications and the marketing. We're also, we have a regional steering committee that we've set up and several sort of sub-working groups along those themes. So the purpose of those subgroups around, let's say, housing and affordability, mobility, transportation, economic, human, and environmental health. There's opportunities for people who are passionate to be part of those. Those are actually, we've made a big effort to make sure those aren't, those have a cross-section of industry, nonprofit, community representatives, and different stakeholders, First Nations, for example, included. So we're doing our best to do that. There's also opportunity on our website to provide your smart solutions if you can't make it to the event.
Thank you. And last question.
Hi, hello. My name is Jamila, and I am an international student here at UVic, and I'm part of the UVic Global Community Student Advisory Council. And we also work with inclusivity and trying to improve the campus for everybody. And one of the things I've noticed, or what I've understood from this panel, is that there is no smart city without having citizens that are informed. And one of those future citizens is, let's say, my generation and younger people. And one of the problems I've noticed is that it is hard to access information that is accurate and real. For instance, you were talking about the United States, where you have cities that call themselves smart cities, but maybe they're not based on the standards that we're following. So my question is, what resources could you suggest or share with us that we could then share with other people and that we could use to learn ourselves and to be more empowered in the topic? Thank you.
I can take a shot at that. So one of the biggest challenges we have is getting open data standards set up in communities, right? The data is there. Eric mentioned it, and others have mentioned it. We've gone from a data drought to a data flood. We have more information collected with digital devices and the information of the Internet of Things out there, all these sensors. We got more data than we know what to do with, but it's in silos. So right now, the technology industry is actually working on open data standards to try and get communities and organizations to share this data in a format that's accessible and usable by others, so we can pull it into different systems and start to analyze and learn from it, to take that data and turn it into knowledge and then to action. So, you know, today there's examples. Maple Ridge, for example, is doing a very good job as a community with their open data standards and sharing their information. There's other examples, you know, Data BC has a big store of information. The question of, is it all correct? Is it all right, that data? That's, again, there's going to be some errors in data always, but it's a matter of getting the digital information collected cleanly and then sharing it so people can then find those errors too and help solve it out. Data is not a one-time thing. It's a thing that it gets better as you use it. So the more we can share it and get more people accessing it, the better it'll become. So,
just very briefly, I think you're asking for how can you learn more about smart cities in general. If you email me, mayor@victoria.ca, I subscribe to a number of newsletters that come from reputable sources, so it just comes into your inbox. So I'm happy to, if you email me, I can share those with you. You can sign up, and then you'll get continuous information.
Just a very quick.
Very quick.
Very,
yes.
very quick. This really hits home to me because a big problem is the synthesis of all that information. It's one thing to provide a process to engage, but you need the time to understand the topic. And so whether it's on housing, understanding the macro trends there, or on the big indicators of how is our air doing? You know, what is the intergenerational debt of abandoned mines right now in BC? These are the data exists, but it's difficult to synthesize and access. So the synthesis piece I'm very interested in.
So my 2-second plug, we at the conference are doing a lot of this data integration. And one of the things we're finding is, of course, the holes and the errors. So one of the big challenges we're all going to have is actually plugging the gaps in the data. But with that, I want to thank you for the questions. You've been very active. Now, it means you can pick up more dessert on the way out, so you'll be even more active this afternoon. But I think we've had a very interesting discussion about smart cities. I really like the definition that they're a place where citizens can meet their everyday needs better. This is going to be a place where we have an Agora, where people can be involved, they can collaborate, where we can take diverse opinions and encourage and really realize inclusivity. We see this powered by data that's collected through the technologies. So there's a real opportunity here, but I think the real big message is it isn't about the destination, it's about the journey in the implementation. If we really want to realize the benefits in inclusivity and diversity, we've got to work at it together. So thank you very much. Join me in thanking the panelists.
Thanking the panelists, but also thanking the moderator. Thank you very much, Dan. That was great.